Hello, and welcome to episode 6 of the Time to Calibrate podcast. I'm Mark Levesque, and joining me today is my co-host Brent Robillard. And unfortunately, Bob Allaby can't join us. He's currently picking up some friends at the airport in Toronto for the Toronto Timepiece show tomorrow. Also joining us is a special guest, Rikki Daman, founder, host, editor, chief, gets poop done officer of Scottish Watches. First, thank you, Rikki. I know how precious your time is and how limited it is. Your presence is very appreciated, and we can't thank you enough.
No problem at all. Looking forward to this one, guys. We've been talking about this for a while, so I'm glad that we've finally managed to carve out just a small section of time before you guys jet off or get on a train, as you said earlier on. But I like to hype things up, so you're getting on your private jets to the next watch event.
We're not quite there yet, but a train will do.
Hey, you just need that Hodinky LVMH money and you'll be jamming.
There you go. Hopefully we keep the content the way we do it instead of the way they do it. But anyways, that's a whole other story.
Sick.
Yeah, so just like all podcasts, all watch podcasts, we always start off with a wrist check. So Rikki, you're the guest of honor. How about you go first?
Okay, it is promotional time. So I am wearing not our latest collab watch, because that appeared and disappeared in an instant. That was a Spinnaker called Nessie, and we got rid of 500 pieces really quickly. The one I'm wearing is one that is almost sold out, and it's their previous model, and that's called the Formex Essence Sky. It's from a brand that we talk about in the show a lot because we really like what they're doing, and it's almost like the universal cheat code of the watch industry. You're getting a hell of a lot of technology and skunkwork projects from these guys because they are officially linked with Dexel. And they provide the bracelets, the bezels, the clasp technology for many, many big brands that you'll have seen on the high street and on the wrists of very affluent professionals and celebrities. So this is probably my favourite collab watch of the ones we've done so far. And do I have time to run through the spec list? I'll run through the spec list. I'll give people a bit of an insight because this is audio. I have to describe things. Aventurine dial. Patented suspension system underneath, highest grade Solita movement inside SW200-1. It has got a UV coating on dial side that you can only see with a UV torch. It's not lume, it doesn't charge up, you don't see it in the dark, you only see it under UV lume, and there's a star field. A couple other things on this one. On the front, there is lume on the index markers, but instead of being one colour or another, green or blue or white, this one emulates the Aurora Borealis. So when you actually lume it up, if you're out in sunlight, you come indoors, or again, you use the UV torch to charge the lume, you'll see green at the top from the 9 to the 3 position, and then the lower half is blue. So again, it looks like the Northern Lights. And the biggest thing, the thing that took so long to do and delayed the watch by a quarter of a year, is if you flip the watch round, clear case back. Everybody's seen that. But there's something amiss. Again, take out the UV torch that comes with the watch, fire it onto the back, and you will see a custom designed and drawn picture of a castle in Scotland, funnily enough, Dunvegan Castle up in the sky. Again, that only shows when you put the torch on it, so it's not sticking out in the back like a Grand Seiko sticker that totally obscures the movement and buggers it up. That is probably my favourite thing of the whole watch, favourite thing of the whole design, because it was a listener to the podcast that actually designed it for us. He is a fantabulous, there's a new word I invented, fantabulous tattoo artist. He's helped us out numerous times throughout the years. Every time we've got a birthday, episode 100, 500, 400, or we've got an anniversary, 5 years, blah, 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 he would create these amazing designs and artworks and things and send it to us. So when this opportunity came around to do some cool stuff with a watch, we gave him the call. He rose to the challenge, and he spent about, it was probably over half a year back and forward coming up with designs, all the rest of it. Finally, watch went out in summer, and yeah, I think it is. It's our favourite collab watch, and we've done quite a lot of them. So that's what I'm wearing on the wrist today.
That's an awesome watch. I have a little more to say about that after. How about you, Brent?
Okay.
Well, I don't think I have to run through the specs on this one because I've talked about it ad nauseum on the show in the past. I have the S&P on my hand again today, and it's the 2531 bond watch. As Rikki already mentioned, I'm headed off to Toronto, and I'm just bringing one watch with me, making it simple. And so that's what I have on wrist this morning, and that's what I'll be wearing all weekend. How about you, Mark?
Nice. Yeah, I've got my Grand Seiko SDGE 257, which is the green Sport GMT Spring Drive, the smaller 40.5 millimeter version. I got that for my 50th birthday, last year, and wear quite a bit. And I got a new acquisition recently. I got a Hamilton Navy Scuba, so the Grand Seiko's been sitting in the box for a little bit, but I brought it out and wore it at Wednesday's Red Bar. Going to wear it on the weekends and going to enjoy it. Now, as far as the Formix you mentioned before, I actually wrote the intro for that watch for Worn & Wound for the launch. And in that intro, I did a little blurb on the Scottish Watch podcast, saying that the Scottish Watch podcast has been disrupting the airwaves for over half a decade with their often sarcastic, frequently biting, but always fun brand of humor, honesty, and fairness. They present unfiltered opinions and conversations with various guests, from the Metropolitan Police officers to the wife and daughter of arguably the most famous watch designer of our time. So Scottish Watches obviously is more than just a podcast. So Rikki, if you had to do an elevator pitch, how would you describe Scottish Watches as a whole, as an entity?
Depends who's in the elevator with me. I would describe probably myself in it as the Joe Rogan podcast for watches. So I bring people on and I act dumb because I am dumb, and I let them tell their stories. It's a hard one to describe quickly, and again, it depends who I'm speaking to. With your audience and the people that follow you and are going to be listening to this, if they haven't heard of us already, because it's an enthusiast community, I'm not speaking to somebody that I'm trying to get a loan of a watch to review. I'm not speaking to a brand about a collaboration. I would say that Scottish Watches is an enthusiast-based media or publishing outlet. That's kind of what it is, because we've got an Instagram page that's run by a guy called Miziel over in New York. He's been with us since he was 15 years old, listener to the show, got him involved in things, didn't realise how young he was. So that was an interesting one, kind of child labour laws and all that. We've also got the website, which is, again, community-driven. We've got a great team of contributors, and we're always opening the doors to anybody that wants to write a review of a watch they own. Maybe it's something that was passed down from a grandfather. Maybe it's something they've saved up to get. Maybe it's a celebration or an anniversary. We also do news and previews from different brands, similar to like what you said for Worn & Wound, but predominantly we are a media-focused outlet, and that covers audio and visual, and that has predominantly been for the last 6+ years it's coming up for the 6-year anniversary actually, because we started the project before the podcast launched, and the podcast is the biggest thing. We took that out January 2019, the week before SIHH, what was to be, I think, the final SIHH maybe. We put that together. We decided we were going to do a podcast. We put one out and we decided again, oh shit, we need to do two, because SIHH is so big, we can't do it in the one. So unfortunately, but also fortunately, we kind of set the wheels in motion and we've kept that trajectory. It's been 2 shows per week, never missed an episode, even though during the pandemic years I was ill, still managed to crank them out, and we're over 600 episodes. As I say, approaching 6 years just now. We've done 9 or 10 collab watches, and the reason that we've kept going is we stick to our guns. And it doesn't matter if somebody's become a friend in the industry. If they do something wrong, we'll talk about it. We don't leave any rocks unturned. And we've had people on like Periscope talking about things. We've had even Nico Leonard on talking about things. It doesn't matter what it is, if it's good, bad, or indifferent. You know, if it's topical and newsworthy, we'll chat about it. But we also add a bit of comedic flair. We don't take it seriously. When I launched the show, I didn't have in my mind, I want to be Hodinkee. I want to be a blog to watch. We don't talk about reference numbers, lug to lugs, the weight of the watch, and how much of a deviation there is on a time grapher. We say, is it a cool watch? Yes or no, and we'll talk about it. And that's kind of opened doors for us as well, because people don't see us as a threat. They don't think we're trying to take away market share or impose ourselves upon other people in the industry like Fratello, Monochrome, blah, blah, blah. We're just there to have fun. It's a hobby. You spend a lot of money on it. It should be enjoyed. And that's kind of the elevator pitch. It's a long ride. That must have been about 300 floors.
That's fine. Well done.
Well, obviously Scottish Watches and all of its iterations has been your passion since 2019, and rightfully so. But you've been in media and communications for over 20 years, creating content for BBC, Sky, ITV, and you've done work in print. Can you tell us and our audience a little bit about that time and how it might have prepared you for where you are now?
I like to say I'm a career nomad. I've never really found a home. I travel a lot through different industries and job titles. I've always kind of done my own thing. I've worked for other people in the past, and some of the names you mentioned there, they were on freelance basis. Some maybe a little bit more than others. Publishing wise, well, media wise, let me pull it all the way back. So I got into communications way back in the 90s when I was a kid, through BBS systems, before the internet really took hold, around about the time the World Wide Web came along. And I used to communicate with people through message boards. So even at an early age, back in the very early 90s, 91, 92, using modems at 2400 baud, I was in a communication phase with people that were maybe a lot older than me. We chatted about computers, programming, things like that. So I've always been quite conversant with audiences that are not in front of me. And then throughout the years, I became a DJ. Got into nightclubs, so again, working with people, entertaining people, reading the room, reading the crowd, what are they interested in? And it has to be something I like that they like, otherwise one of us is being fake. Carry that forward, I got into cars once I was able to get my licence, and that was at the time where the web had really kicked off. It was the end of the 90s, 98, 99, and I created my first webpage to do with the car that I had, because nobody was really doing it here in the UK. That grew into the local modification scene, performance tuning scene in Scotland, and I created a website for that, and it became big because it was the only one that people could use. I had the technical aspects behind the scenes to create the thing, and also the interaction with other human beings, that they would come and they would converse with me and other people. So we had forums. It grew from there. Then I got into print media. I got headhunted by a publishing house. They saw what I was doing. They already had different magazines on the go, and the Fast and the Furious movie had just come out.
So everybody was all about NOS. Everybody was about neon lights, danger to manifold and all that
Drifting and all that stuff.
Yeah, it all kicked off big, and I caught the wind in my sails, and that projected me into media, going back the way into publishing, obviously, print media and Dead Trees. Did that for a while, but it opened my eye up to how business works, how publishing works, how media works. I was also avid into photography at that time. That grew. And then video. Before YouTube, we had things like Dailymotion. We had Vimeo had just kind of appeared, and I was actually hosting video files back in 2000 on my own server, crippling the bandwidth. But I got into it then, and it kind of grew. As I say, I did work for the BBC. I was constantly getting called up to appear on radio shows to talk about modified cars, because it was a very big thing here, performance tuning. It went from there. Worked for Max Power magazine in the UK, worked for different newspapers, did some work for ITV, Channel 5, Sky TV. Some of these places bought content already produced. Some of them asked me to go and do stuff, and I was learning all the time, just feeling my way through it. Ended up at the end, just before the podcast, in the wedding business, because I was good at photography, I was good at videos, and if you do that enough, somebody is going to ask you, hey, listen, I'm getting married, do you want to come and take some photographs for me? And I thought, yeah, I mean, what's the worst that can happen? I can ruin someone's special day that they're never going to repeat. Yeah, sign me up. So I did that for a while. It was lucrative. If people look at a wedding photographer or video guy and say, oh, thousands of dollars, oh, that's just terrible. I mean, the camera only costs a couple of $100. It's what you have in the background. The fact that you have to be on your A game. You can't go back a week on Thursday to redo the pictures of someone's wedding. All lies on you. You get it wrong, you get sued. That's what happens. And also, you are the sheepdog, trying to get the flock of sheep that is 300 drunk guests together for photographs, for video, get them in the right place at the right time. A lot of stuff behind the scenes. And that was my bread and butter up until the pandemic. And the podcast launched the year before the pandemic for fun, frolics, just having a giggle, never meant to be anything bigger or more serious, but it took a foothold. We got a lot of interest from America. We got a feature in the New York Times that massively bolstered the audience base. I like to say this kind of anecdote that a lot of the early listeners let us know that they liked the show because we didn't care. we weren't the Swiss industry. We weren't suited and booted and watching our P's and Q's. And also, there's a link between America and Canada. Well, definitely Canada, because my family immigrated to Canada and then some came back to Scotland and a lot went to America. So a lot of American listeners, they've got an ancestor, they've got somebody that lived in the Highlands, they've got somebody that had a Scottish castle, or they like to believe so. So that was a good synergy, and we picked up a lot of audience that's retained all the way through. At the moment, looking at current stats, 38% of our audience on Instagram, YouTube and podcast is American. The rest is European. That is a hell of a good split. So fast forward to the end of my wedding career. That would have been 2020 when all weddings got cancelled across the world, as you may well know. And it put me back quite a distance, because unlike people that maybe ended up in furlough, where they had a job and they no longer had a job, I actually had to pay back deposits to brides and grooms. I had to pay back full amounts. So I didn't just stop dead. I went back thousands and thousands. Thankfully, quite a frugal guy, don't spend a lot of money on stupid things apart from wristwatches, so I was okay. But the big changeover, the crossover point that I see on the chart is brands got in touch. They said, we've heard that you guys, you've been going for over a year, you've got a bit of staying power, we'd like to advertise. Companies like eBay got in touch and said, we would like to promote what we're doing through your platform. And that started to trickle and grow. And then as the pandemic went on, more people got into podcasts because they were sitting at home or they were doing gym activities. They had free time. A lot of people grew. A lot of people started their own podcasts that we're now considering friends and we work with. But it definitely did help us. As much as I lost one business, another one grew in its place, Phoenix from the Flames. And it's just gone from there. We went across to Dubai Watch Week. We've been across to New York for things. We're in Geneva all the time for various different events. And as I say, we've collaborated with many people. We've done 600 episodes and we haven't been sued yet. So there is the short version of Scottish Watches up to today and as we're chatting just now.
Excellent. I've speaking of when you started during the pandemic, that's when I discovered Scottish Watches. Where I live in Quebec, we had a mandated curfew at 8 o'clock to be in our homes. We were all
listening to the show. Yeah, put that in place.
Exactly. So I was always a podcast listener. I've been listening to podcasts since 2007, maybe even earlier than that, with The Nerdist and Stuff You Should Know and This American Life and all this other stuff. And then I started listening to watch podcasts. Back then there weren't many. It was probably just one. And then, like I said, COVID happened. We had a lot of extra time on our hands, and I was starting to run out of the podcasts I was listening to. So I was searching for others, and lo and behold, I found Scottish Watches. And I also started hiking at the same time because there was nothing else to do. And I live in a forested area. We have trails here, so I would take off after work around 5, 6 o'clock, oftentimes in the dark, with a little torch, and listening to Rikki and Dave making me laugh in the forest, walking in the dark. It was just a great time having you guys in my ears. And and believe it or not, I mentioned I was at Red Bar on Wednesday, and one of our listeners came up to me, and because you noticed the post that we did on Instagram saying that you'd be on, and he asked me point blank, ask Rikki, what happened to Rick?
R.I.P. Rick. No, there was a lot of things happened at the one time. We have talked about it in the show, but nobody's really asked about it for a while. I need to even rewind it back further. So Scottish Watches, the entity, was the name of my Instagram account from 2017 forwards. And I'd grown it to maybe a couple of thousand people because the more time you have, the more time you invest. And I was spending 5 hours setting up one photograph because at the time, I was doing the wedding photography, I was editing it, I wanted something different to do. So that account was literally me setting up cool stuff with the watches I had. Then I met Rick at a Red Bar event, my first ever Red Bar event back in 2018, I think it was. And we started chatting online about things. And that's where the idea of doing like a web, it was supposed to be a website. The podcast was an idea that I came up with later on. And we started the podcast after I had been shunned by another podcast. I wanted to go on. I'd approached them, another watch podcast, and said, listen, I go to SIHH, I've been to Baselworld as a punter, I would love to come on, I know you've got guests, and I can tell your listeners how easy this is and how amazing it is, because people pay money to go to soccer matches, they pay money to go to rock concerts, they travel around the world to follow people they enjoy or a hobby they love. Well, if they like watches, they can spend less than $100 for a return plane ticket from Scotland or the UK across to Geneva, walk into SIHH, love the show, jump in a plane because the airport's joined onto the exhibition centre, and they can do it in a day. And it's amazing, and people would love to do this. I could come on and tell people. And they basically said, F off. And I thought, oh, that's nice. And then I started chatting with Rick about, well, we could do this, we could do that. And I came up with a really ridiculous name that I'm glad we didn't use, and it was going to be called Wrist Action with a couple of dicks.
Because we're both called Richard.
And that didn't fly, so we never did that. But what we did do was obviously talked about the community stuff. We were trying to come up with a name of what we could call it. And at the last minute, we just threw everything out. And I said, you know what? Let me just convert my Instagram account across and we'll just use that because it's kind of generic and it'll work. Thankfully, it did. So that's how me and Rick got involved in things. He was the opposite to me. The Odd Couple, the old TV show, and then it turned into a movie where you've got the prim and proper guy that doesn't drink, smoke, swear, nothing like that. And then you've got me, the guy that's got the motorbike, the guy that DJ'd in nightclubs, the guy that knows every bad word on Urban Dictionary. That's me. So it was a good marriage of the two. And it's probably one of the reasons it kicked off immediately was I was very low-key humour, dick and fart jokes, and he wasn't. He was very, he's very religious. He's involved with the church. He's never said a bad word in his life, from what I can tell. And that kind of worked until in the UK at the end of 2020, Brexit kicked in. And his family business was transportation and haulage. And that was the biggest change. Obviously, they knew it was his family and the company knew it was happening. But see, when it did happen, that crux point, he had to down tools and all the stuff and all the free time that he had to invest it in what was going on there. So he literally phoned me and said, listen, it's hit the fan. He didn't use the S word because he doesn't do that. He said, it's hit the fan. I need to disappear and concentrate on the family business. Can you and Dave kind of look after things for a while? And I thought a while meant a couple of weeks. But a while meant until the next year. So he disappeared. And then when he came back to chat about, coming back on the show, we tried to tease him on. We did our Swatch, first collaboration watch. We tried to get him on that show late 2020. He didn't have the time. We tried to get him on for the birthday edition after. He didn't have the time. He had no time whatsoever. And then it got to a stage where he'd been away so long and he wanted to come back that he had different ideas. He also wanted to now come into the public fray. He'd always been a bit worried about showing his face or people knowing his real name or his full name or where he stayed or what he worked as, because being involved with the church and talking about £1 million watches, they didn't, in his mind, they didn't really gel properly. You can't be trying to raise money for charity when you're talking about buying a 10 grand watch, that kind of thing. So there was lots of bits and problems there, but we finally did a face reveal with Rick, me, Dave and Rick. I think it must have been around about April, May time, 2021. And we did that, but because it's a weird one, and I don't know how much me and him have spoken about how much he wanted to reveal, but I think it's fine. Because he was now out in the open and people knew who he was and they'd seen his face, he wanted to reduce the content in the show as it was, taking out the dick and fart jokes, because they thought people in his community, people at his church, may go and find it by accident or be recommended it. And then there's this loudmouth Scottish guy, as in me, going crazy, and he's trying to cover the other side. And it was just a disjointment. There was no anonymity any longer. It wasn't a fun project from that side of it, and he was very worried. So we talked about it. How do you want to do it? Do you want to come on once every so often? How do you want to process it? And he thought the best thing would be just a clean cut, and he can go away and do something that is maybe more reserved. So he launched his own little thing. I think it was called the Wind Up Merchants, and they did a few episodes. He was speaking to Prophet and Watches, another religious person on Instagram that does watches as well. And then he found his new home with Ariel Adams at a blog to watch. So he's been there doing stuff with them. And we've met up a couple of times just by pure accident. We weren't friends before the podcast, so it wasn't like we fell out or anything. It was just that we turn up for an hour, we'd record the show, we'd disappear. But we bumped into him over at Watches and Wonders last year. And everything's fine. It was amicable. There was no fallout. You didn't see any vitriol on either side on Instagram. But that was basically it. He disappeared, and when he came back and he'd shown his face to the public, he wanted to curtail the kind of jokes that I was making about what ATMs are, and it's not automated teller machines.
Stuff like that.
And that's basically it. There's no great secret, but we also don't harp on about it or dwell upon it because we don't want people constantly picking at the wound saying, so what happened? Was there a fallout? What happened? We dealt with it at that moment in time. We mentioned it a couple of times, and that was it. So he's doing his thing, we're doing our thing. There's no animosity, and every time we meet up, we have a chat. It's all good.
It's funny because Ariel Adams had the first podcast that I was talking about, the first one that I was listening to for watches, and he was hosting it with another guy named John Biggs, who was running a website called watchreviews.com, I believe. And, it was the only one, so I listened to it, and it was very difficult because especially John, Ariel participate as well. They would make fun of Europeans, make fun of European names, do accents. It was really different than what he's producing now. So it's kind of funny that Dave went over there, because if he was part of that podcast back then, he'd be even more embarrassed than he was with you.
You know what, though? That's an interesting point you raise. And the way I look at things is I see myself not as a comedian, because I'm not a comedian. I just say things without a filter, which sometimes is funny by accident. And with our show, I always have to be careful what the current mindset is of the public, because a joke that maybe Ariel Adams made 10 years ago is completely different to a joke you'd make today in this climate, or something that somebody might say in the early 2000s, the 90s, the 80s. So I do remember those episodes. I remember Ariel Adams created a number of different shows, different names with different people. And again, he was probably just trying to find his groove. He is a long-form author, publisher, journalist. He creates fantastic stories, and he can definitely get the word count up on his essays at university without putting stuff at the end in white space. But you just have to be careful, and I know what you're talking about, and I wouldn't, again, dwell on that or ever talk about it in the past, because we all did things, we all said things that were a little bit iffy. And I was talking to somebody a few days ago about a movie that I watched, funnily enough, and it's Kenneth Branagh, and he's doing Hercule Poirot, I think it was Death on the Nile, Agatha Christie stuff, and he's an Englishman doing a French accent. And I thought, in this day and age, where are you allowed to stop? Because I know American people got into trouble for making the accent of Mario that is a fake Italian character, and I'm just like, 10 years ago, you could do what you liked. You could say what you liked. South Park got away with, they still do to this day, tons of stuff, but I'm always quite careful with what I say, that I don't take the piss out of people. I take the piss out of an idea or a watch or a huge conglomerate faceless brand like an IBM or something like that, and don't attack people, because you know what it's like. Somebody will dig out a podcast you made 1,000 years ago, a Twitter post that you made you thought you'd deleted, and you just got to be super careful these days. Don't know why I talked about that. I think it was because it was in my mind talking about the movies I was watching the other day.
That reminded me, recently I saw a reel with Steve Martin doing the Pink Panther, and he was doing this heavy French accent, and the person was trying to get him to say hamburger. It's very funny. But again, like you said, that's, that kind of humor 20 years ago or 30 years ago when that first came out. It's not the same as it is now.
I think it's not, it's strange, because in my head I have got my political correctness hat that I'm wearing, where I won't say that I find things like that okay. If I was to swivel it round on everything, I should be really annoyed at Caretaker Willie from The Simpsons.
But I'm not.
I don't care. I don't care about American people doing Scottish accents. I don't care about people. There was something quite recently, I know it's a tangent, I'll be super quick. There was a thing recently where an American celebrity came to Scotland and was scared about wearing a kilt because they thought it was cultural appropriation. And we would love that. We don't mind at all. So I don't know how much of that kind of stuff that's talked about is people trying to white knight and protect folks that don't care. I remember seeing a YouTube reel where people had been offended because somebody had dressed up in the traditional Three Amigos Mexican garb.
With the maracas and the hat.
Yeah.
And all these white folks were saying, that's terrible, that's appropriation, that's terrible. And then the same people went down to Mexico and walked up to loads of people and said, what do you think of that? And they went, that's amazing, that's so cool. So yeah, people just like being offended sometimes for the sake of it. I don't mind if people want to walk around in kilts and paint their face like Braveheart, because he was an Australian guy anyway, apparently. So carry on.
Well, the problem with that is he felt uncomfortable because he wanted to keep his underwear underneath the kilt.
Definitely not true Scotsman.
Well, I'll pull us back here a little bit, but you and Mark have already mentioned this, particularly your recent collaboration with Formex, the SN39 Sky, SKYE, of course. But by my count, there's got to be at least 9 or 10 collaborations out there now. Can you tell us a little bit?
Ask me to
No, I won't. But can you tell us about how something like that comes together? How do you know, for example, when something is the right fit for Scottish watches? And can you walk us through that process a bit?
Yeah. Oh, it's tricky. And I'm feeling my way through everything. Anybody that's listening to this, I want them to understand that I'm having fun here. This is all new. Every day is a learning opportunity. And this is something I try and tell younger folks, because I didn't have somebody to tell me this. See, when you grow up and you look at your mum and your dad and you say, they know everything, they know what's going on, they're fumbling around in the dark trying to figure this stuff out too. And it's the same with me, with podcasting, collaborations, all the rest of it. I can be speaking to a one-man band that maybe makes 500 watches a year and the guy loves it, it's a passion project. Or I can be speaking to one of the biggest watch companies in the world. And we're not just talking luxury, we're talking fashion, stuff like that. I'm being careful what I say because I don't know if there's an NDA, but it's different with everybody. And I remember the first collaboration we ever did was with Swatch, which is kind of the biggest brand in the world for watches. And that was a Swatch XU. We had one of the listeners to the show, this was in the Rick days, the Rick, me and Dave, and we asked her to create an illustration that would end up being...
Diana.
Yes. Oh, she's phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal.
She's such a wonderful person.
She's a kindred spirit. She is just too many good things to say about her and her artwork. People need to check out what she does. It's truly amazing. And she created very carefully, based on our ideas. This was the first time we'd done a collaboration, and she hit the nail on the head. We didn't change anything. I think we changed a couple of things due to patent or copyright infringement reasons, maybe, but we'll leave that aside. And she created what looked like a tileable background, a wallpaper, or if you get, I don't know, Christmas wrapping paper where the edges match and there's a pattern that repeats. So she did that for us, and the way that platform worked was you would have a big image, and on your computer or your phone you could pinch, zoom, rotate and place a template of a watch over the top, and anything that appeared in the template would be printed and stamped on your watch. So it was custom. It was a template, but you could personalise it. So that was our first one. That was quite easy, although we found legal issues dealing with the Swiss legal departments. Is this copyrighted? Can we use that Pantone colour? That was baptism of fire with those guys. That was the biggest. And from there we did a Christopher Ward. That was a lot easier because it was a British company, and it was more friendly because we knew Mike France. Then we did one with Rikki. That was a bit trickier because it was in a different country, and then it was super tricky because at the moment that was ready to go on sale, special operations happened. So that kind of nuked that process. Bad choice of words there, Rikki. Careful what you say. But then the Formex, again, Raf is a friend. He's been on the show a number of times. We meet up every time in Geneva. He comes across. We go for dinner, apart from the most recent time because he had a nasty mountain biking accident and nearly killed him. He punctured both his lungs with his ribs and things like that. Very dangerous. I think motorbikes are bad. Mountain bikes are terrible. But the process for that was, we've talked about your watches. You've sent us watches to review. There are a million people out there that love the brand. We do collaborations. Why haven't we spoken yet? So it was very informal, and there was an existing relationship there because we'd seen his watches, we'd worn them, we'd tried them, we'd tested them. I took a batch of his releases to Bulgaria on a weeks-long trip last year. I had the Gamma Ray, I had the Malachite, I had the full carbon and meteorite, and I was wearing a different watch each day, sort of doing the trials and tribulations of going through Eastern Europe, and I was wearing a brand that wouldn't be stolen from me. So there was an existing relationship. We turned it into a partnership. We turned it into something different. And instead of a brand maybe working with an influencer and changing the colour of the bezel or the colour of the dial or changing the type of numerals, the font that's used, and then going, there we are, limited edition, lots of thought and time went into it. Anytime we work with a brand, it has to be somebody we know and we already know in depth, because we don't want to put our name on something that maybe they sell 100 of them and 50 of them are duds, or somebody gets ripped off, or somebody doesn't get what they thought they were, or they're unhappy, because that blows back on me. So it has to be right. There has to be an existing relationship, because I don't want to put... Again, Scottish Watches is my baby. It's like the band that I created, the soccer team that I started, the building that I put together and architected. I've got a very close relationship with the name itself, and I don't want it to be tarnished, because I've put blood, sweat and tears into it for 6 years. So a collaboration can look various different ways, from Christopher Ward, where it was literally maybe 4 or 5 Zoom calls back and forward, lots of emails and lots of WhatsApps of designs, try this, try that. It could be the Swatch, which is very business orientated from their side. And with that one, we didn't make a single penny on it. We didn't recuperate any of our cost or time or investment. We did that one at zero cost to us. We made nothing from it. That was because it was during...
So for your listeners, I think if I remember correctly...
people in my family... excuse me, people in my family lost their livelihoods during the pandemic. That's not as bad as losing your life or the life of a loved one. I know that. But it had dramatic effects on the income generation of members of my family. And I looked around and I saw people loving life because they were getting free money for sitting in the house and playing video games, which was absolutely fine. You know, some people win, some people lose. But I thought, for our first collaboration, I don't want to make any money on that, because I don't feel it's right in that instance. And we put that one out at cost price. We didn't make $10 on each watch or anything like that at all, just straight to zero. And we kept it at the normal price that you would pay walking into a Swatch boutique to buy things. With different brands, it works different ways. Some, as I say, some influencers and collaborators, they really don't put any effort into anything. But I told you the story of the Formex. That was a process that was about a year long. Probably more than a year, and talked about for 2, because it was 2 years ago at Geneva Watch Days, me and Raf first had the rough idea of doing something, and then we put it into serious practice a year ago. But some other ones, they come along and they happen very easily. We kind of look at each other. I inked a deal by a handshake at Geneva Watch Days just a month ago there. I was in Beau Rivage, bumped into somebody that does shows with us, that we've worked with in the past and promoted their stuff. And we inked a deal, literally within 5 minutes. Let's do it. How does it look? It looks like that. And because there was a synergy of having had this person on the show multiple times, we almost felt as if we'd worked together before. So it became easy. Whereas if a new brand appears out of nowhere, and we get emails all the time, you'll start to get this as you get more episodes out there. Brands will get in touch with you because they think they can capitalise on your name. You know, the back in the 80s, it was put something on a lunchbox and sell 1 million of them. That's what some watch brands look at creators, independent people. That's why some people never do them. That's why some people do one a month. I mean, it used to be the running joke, Hodinkie's limited editions were regular. You know, you would rip off the month in your calendar and there'd be a new limited edition ready to rock. Revolution are quite good at that just now. They're putting out a lot of stuff, but it also fatigues the audience. And they look at it as, well, you know, I like this one, but if I buy this and put my money in this month, there may be something better next month. So we limit what we do. We do 2 limited editions, maximum 3 a year. We don't want to do one a month. We don't want one a quarter even. We want to think about it, set time aside, work on ideas, and then bring it. And it has to have something unique about it. It doesn't always have to be something to do with Scotland. The Raketa Mars was to celebrate 50 years since an image from Mars came back from one of the whatever it was they sent. I think it was a probe they sent out to Mars that was very crap looking, as you would expect, but that was implemented in the dial, how it looked. And then we've got ones that are nothing but Scotland. The latest one we did with Spinnaker, the Nessie. That one there was a follow-on from Braveheart, funnily enough it was called, that came out last year. And from what I could tell, nobody had incorporated a slashed saltire on a bezel. It was amazing. I thought it was very standoutish. It popped. If you were a fan of the brand, if you were looking for an inexpensive mechanical wristwatch with an automatic movement inside, it was great. If you liked the colour blue, it was cool. If you liked Scotland, it was cool. And if you were a listener or somebody that appreciated what we do at Scottish Watches, it was cool. It hit so many talking points and ticks in people's checkboxes for a cool watch. And then the most recent one we did, Nessie, it was that one hyped up even more, but only if you went looking for it. So if you took it off and you looked at the case back, there was a little Loch Ness monster on the rotor. If you looked at the front and you used the UV torch, again, this has been the year of UV and it wasn't expected or known. If you used the UV torch, a little Loch Ness monster would appear, because it's always very difficult to find Nessie when you come to Scotland. You know, you have to look in the depths to find. Yeah, it's tricky. You know, few people have managed it. So that's what we wanted to emulate. All our collaborations, they're well thought out. They're with people we trust and we know. And they have to have a lot of back and forward with myself and the team here. And there is a team. It's not just Rikki that does everything. We've got Miziel that runs our social media and does our show notes. He's phenomenal. Can't spell worth an F, but he's a phenomenal little guy and he's doing better. Right? We've got Philologus and Miziel, plus a whole host of people that are in our writing pool. We've got WhatsApp groups. We've got Ralph. We've got Mark over in New York. We've got Philip. We've got Phil. We've got Roberto. Tons and tons of people. Apologies to anyone I've missed out. I've got long COVID issues with memory problems. And on the video front, it's me and Dave that record from our studios that we've built. The video content appears on YouTube, and we've got a video editor called Gavin. So there are all these different wheels within the drivetrain that is the movement of Scottish Watches. So they're all getting, at different points, we incorporate the ideas from them. And sometimes we'll reach out to people that are co-hosts, people that come on like Barbara Palumbo, Sarah Ferguson, guys and girls that appear on the show more often than not, to get their advice on things. And sometimes they'll spot things that we don't know. Sometimes in a limited edition, I'll phone up Roger Smith, the world's greatest living watchmaker, and say, what do you think we should do for the date disc, white or black? And he'll tell me what's going on. And then I can officially say Roger Smith had a hand in making this watch.
It's a Roger Smith collaboration.
Exactly.
Add another zero.
Well, you know, Rikki, I was going to ask you this question a little bit later in the podcast, but because you're talking about relationships in Scotland, I figure that it's maybe a good time to bring it up now. So I'm looking at a photograph right now of your collaboration with Christopher Ward, the C63 Sealander, or Highlander as it's nicknamed. And of course, it's got that sort of double flag texture, the St. George, St. Andrew, so very Scottish. And you obviously have a special relationship with Christopher Ward. Where I work at the Calibrated Wrist, we also have close ties with certain brands who were there with us in the beginning. And in that respect, I have always viewed watch journalism as something that it's symbiotic. And what I mean, I guess, is that watch journalism, when we talk about it, we're really talking about watch enthusiasm. It's not hard news. It's meant to be fun. So I'm curious, how do you separate your enthusiast self with its favorites and brands and styles from your critic self when you're reporting on watches, or do you even bother?
Interesting topic that has come to the fray over the past 2 weeks due to us being included in a newsletter to do with watches, giving us a hard time about certain things. Now, we always approach what we do as we're enthusiasts, we're not experts. And that is true on my side, and to give credit, not true on Dave Sharp's side, because he's been a collector since 1996. He bought one of the Pierce Brosnan Bond watches from Omega back in the day. He's had it serviced and the colour changed on the hands because it faded. That's how long he's been into this stuff. Me, my first luxury watch I bought in 2017, and I had no clue. I tell the story all the time. I thought Rolex was the name of a watch. I didn't realise it was a brand that made more than one type of watch. I had no clue. And the only reason that I bought that is, very simply, I was at a point in my life where I'd grown the business, I had a car, a house, a motorbike. What does a guy buy next? A wristwatch. So I did, and it didn't work. Blah, blah, blah. Long story short, everyone's probably heard this before. It didn't work, and because it didn't work, I researched why it didn't work. I'm mechanically minded. I've always messed around with cars, motorbikes, and computers. And within 8 hours of researching why does this watch not work correctly, I had a new hobby. It was burning away in my subconscious. That led me to 3 months later taking a trip to Baselworld, walking through the entry doors, and it was like walking into my first rock concert, walking into your first whatever you're into, and just been wowed by it. The scale, the scope, the things you didn't know, and the things that attracted you. Now, when it comes to what we do with the show, we will talk about any brand at all that appeals to us. How many watches are released every week? We only have room probably for 3 to 4 highlighted pieces per week, plus news, plus feedback from listeners, plus things that we've seen, and what we've been up to, because we find that this is an enthusiast platform and we put our personality through what we talk about. It's not prim and proper. Like I said, it's not all facts and figures and reference numbers and deviations and beat rate and amplitude. We don't talk about that. It's the visual representation, because see, if it doesn't look good, you're not going to buy it. Doesn't matter if it's got the best movement in the world, you're not going to buy it. Doesn't matter if it's accurate to 0.5 seconds per 3 days. Unless it looks good on the wrist and you like the visual aspects of it, it ain't going to be denting your bank balance. So everything we do is driven by what something looks like initially. And when it comes to working with friends or talking about people, we will give them a hard time. We have multiple times given crap to brands that we've worked with in the past, that we've interviewed, that we've had on the show. And sometimes they like it because they say, you know what, you have to be truthful. You have to tell the story the way it is. Don't bury the lead. Dave has got a great relationship with Omega. He's been buying their watches for so long. He's such a good customer. He was taken to the Olympics by them. We get on great with them. But last year, when Periscope broke the news of the dodgy Speedmaster 57, we had them on the show talking about it. We didn't bury it. Lots of media outlets will not talk about things, either because they don't want to piss off a brand, a conglomerate. They don't want the legal hassles of potentially getting a cease or desist. But I take a very, lick my thumb, place it in the air. How does it feel? Can we talk about this? Is it something people want to know about? Only watch when all the hullabaloo came around about the different shell companies behind the scenes, and this was a little bit murky, and suddenly this person was in charge of that company and it was linked to this. We talked about it in the show. We didn't glamorize or clickbait or anything like that. It was something that was serious. We'd had Luke on the show before. We talked to him in real life. We actually produced our own charity event last year that we asked him if it was okay to call ours Every Watch, because it was open to the everyman. Everybody could get involved from $2,000 up the way, whereas he was Only Watch. It was only the people that had the means to buy, and he was happy with it. So we cover things even when it's detrimental to people we would consider friends, associates, or colleagues in the industry. And there has been a lot of bias. We have noticed with people, there have been some stories in different places where you can definitely see that there's somebody behind the scenes controlling the narrative or trying their best to, and it's something we don't do, and we stand behind it. And we, as I say, we got a little bit of heat over the last couple of weeks. Somebody published something in a newsletter saying that, well, they weren't happy because Dave Sharp, co-host of Scottish Watches, is also the business development manager for Raj Watches over in Switzerland. And sometimes on our Instagram page, we will post, Raj have got a new release. And apparently that was a conflict of interest. We didn't disclose it, blah, blah, blah. And I got this emailed to me as soon as it was put out in the open by two listeners. Immediately sent it to me, and then it was followed up by many others afterwards. So I immediately got on the phone to the guy that wrote it, because I deal with problems head on. And if someone's got something they want to talk to me about, then I'll go ahead. So I got him on the phone and I said, what is the issue? And he just repeated what I told you there. I said, okay then, let me just break it down for you. Dave is a co-host on the show. He's not an employee, he's a freelancer. He gets paid an hourly wage for what he does with us. He does one show a week out of the two. He does no influence. He has got no access to post on our Instagram, our website, or YouTube. He doesn't even have access to publish content. It's all edited and put together by me. So he is literally a presenter on a TV show on a TV channel. Now, our Instagram page is run by a guy called Miziel. He's been with us since he was 15 years old. He's now 20, I believe. And he does the content there. He thinks up what to do. And anything that's pertinent, he'll post about. And we do thousands of posts a year. So the fact that this guy went through and counted that we'd done 5 posts about Raj over the past 12 months. So out of 1,000, having 5 to do with Raj, didn't see that as a problem. Second of all, Dave has no access to it. There was no favouritism. And third, how many times do we mention Rolex? How many Omega releases did we talk about? How many times was there a post about Tudor or Zenith or any other company? And also on the show, we constantly tell people that Dave worked for Raj, because sometimes he has to use their studio to record because he's in Switzerland, not in Scotland. So we're always telling people the truth. We're always telling them what happens there. And even with Dave, the fact that his bosses, Andy and Zoo, that run Raj, they allowed him And when he joined their company a couple of years ago, one of the stipulations they said to him was, we want you to continue doing the podcast. It's amazing. It is such a breath of fresh air. And we've had Andy on the show a number of times. And we were one of the first.
Talking about Araj, well before you started working there.
2020, before the pandemic, we invited Araj to Scotland so we could record some content and talk about their new project to do an inexpensive tourbillon. This was in 2020. Dave started work for them in 2022. And it was because of the podcast, they liked what he did and they wanted to have him on. But every time we talk about Raj, we mention beforehand that Dave works for them. There is no conflict of interest. And the big point that I got through to the gentleman who then posted something this week, which was really good and covered everything I said, was, tell me any other brand that would stipulate they wanted a person they were employing to promote their company and products, stipulate they talk about other brands in a positive light, allows them to use their studio at Raj HQ to talk about competing brands in a positive light. It's unheard of. So I think we go above and beyond when it comes to transparency, because there's no other way to do it. And I want to wake up every morning not worried that someone's going to catch me out or find something that I've done. Everything is out in the open. Everything we do. That's why we talk about our personal lives. We talk about what we've been up to, what movies we've watched, what cool stuff we've done, the Comic-Cons I've been to, the car events I've driven to, and all the rest of it. So yeah, there is, on our side, I see us as being as good as we possibly can be. Everybody can do better. I don't know how. I'm open to suggestions. But I just feel like my conscience is clear with everything I do. And I wake up and I want to have fun with this. I don't want to be worried about, oh my God, something's going to happen. Someone's going to find out that this thing I said, this movement isn't completely in-house, as they would say in the industry.
It's a great philosophy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Rikki, Scottish Watch has had some really amazing guests over the years. You've had Jean-Claude Biver, David Coulthard, obviously the Genta family, and a whole bunch of others. And throughout, you've always been very professional, very cool, calm, collected. Don't seem nervous like I was at the beginning of this podcast and stumbled through some words. Has your experience before, obviously with your broadcasting, has that helped? And have you had any guests on that made you very nervous, maybe even starstruck a little bit?
I love it when people ask me questions and I haven't thought about the answers because I didn't know they were going to ask. I would say yes and no. The early days, it was weird. When we first did our first podcasts, it was new to me. I'd never done a podcast before. I'd listened to plenty, but just because you watch a lot of football doesn't make you a good player. So there was a lot of things I was processing. I wasn't big on speaking in front of crowds. I didn't like doing presentations, public speaking, etc., etc. And that was probably the reason in the early days that I was a DJ, because I didn't have to perform anything. I just had to make sure the needle didn't skip. And again, reading the crowd, seeing what they wanted, what they liked, and trying to navigate into a place where everybody was happy. So with the podcast, I think my technical abilities of editing, making it sound good, fixing the breaths, the ums, the ahs, taking out the reverb in the room and trying to balance the audio. So somebody listening in their car or in headphones or on a $50,000 sound system in their house, they've all got a good appreciation of what we're talking about without it being jarring. And there are so many podcasts I try and listen to where the audio quality sucks so much I have to turn it off because it irritates my eardrum. So that was one side. The talking, that was a thing we had to get good at quick. And it's something I try and work on myself. I'm constantly revising in my head the next sentence that's coming so that I don't go, yeah, you know. I try and cut out the filler words. Still does happen. We're all only human, but I try my best. Also, another thing I learned to do was to slow down the cadence of my speaking, change the rhythm, make it more palatable, more listenable, because Scottish people are notorious for speaking quickly, and American listeners always have trouble with the accent. So we really have to tone it down to an international audience. So I would say, yes, it did help, but no, it didn't. And it's been a constant evolution. And I am always on YouTube Googling things or searching for things such as how to be a radio presenter. And I found most of the best information and knowledge and hints and tips I've picked up was looking at BBC training materials from the 70s and 80s. Yeah, and not for the bad reasons, because anyone in the UK know about the BBC back in the 70s. Not for those reasons, guys. Presentation technique. they would explain in these videos that you can find on YouTube that because people were listening on the crappiest of televisions, the crappiest of radios with the crappiest of speakers, people really had to project their voice, talk in a way that was understandable in all conditions, because people used to listen to the radio in factories and things like that. Plus there was that kind of mid-Atlantic fake accent that people in America and the UK used to use, again, so that it could be understood. But it took me through the motions of how to present better, how to speak, and how to take an idea and turn it into words, paint a picture with 1,000 words. And if anyone's looking to get into media, broadcasting, podcast, YouTube videos, that's something to look at, because there have been so many videos I've come across where I look at the thumbnail and think, that's a topic I'd love to find out more about, and the presenter puts me off. They turn me off and I end up going elsewhere. So I don't know if that answered your question. I can't remember what the question was.
You mentioned the accent, and I'm going to blame you here, because sometimes when I'm reading description of watches, the voice in my head sounds like Scotty from Star Trek.
Was he not Canadian?
He was indeed. He was.
Good.
Yeah.
Cultural appropriation from back in the 60s, eh? Yeah,
the accent, it's strange, because people do, even in the YouTube comments, we get the comedians coming in going, oh, couldn't understand a word of it, where are the subtitles? But the Americans seem to get away with listening to Billy Connolly. They get away with Kevin Bridges. They got away with Sean Connery. But for some reason, or they can watch Train Spotting and Braveheart and get away with it. But our little podcast, professionally edited, twice a week.
Oh, well. It's good.
I think you guys do a fantastic job. Honestly, it's not hard to listen to. Oh, it's just, you get so, I listen to so many of them that, watch descriptions sometimes come out as a Scottish accent in my head.
I'm glad we have infiltrated the grey matter. But no, it's something we continue to do. And even when I'm even when I'm on a Zoom call, and it doesn't have to be with somebody that we're going to be doing business with or want to drag onto the show, I'm always reflecting, even watching myself when I'm recording videos. What am I doing with my hands? How am I doing things? Does it look as if I'm trying too hard? There are some YouTubers that are almost... Long story short, I dated somebody in my past who was autistic, was on the spectrum, and she explained to me a lot of information about how people on the spectrum, they run scripts. They don't pick up on social cues certain ways, so they emulate and they do motions. They go through the motions, as people would say. So I try not to do things like that on not on television, on camera. I say television because it's a television that I see myself on. But I'm always trying to improve myself, and I think the day you stop, the day you think you know everything is the day you know nothing at all, and every day is a school day, so everybody should be constantly learning, and you're not stealing ideas when you watch other people or you listen to other people, you're just adding different things to your own repertoire that you can utilise going forward. You're not borrowing and stealing, you're just increasing your own talent and knowledge base that then can be utilised for cool things in the future.
Yeah, very good.
That's great.
So Toronto is having their first big major watch show. It's called the Toronto Timepiece Show. It being held obviously in Toronto. There's going to be over 60 brands, including Christopher Ward, Oris, Ferrer, Fears, you name it, the gambit. They're from 17 different countries. And it's going to be held this Saturday and Sunday. And my biggest worry is the crowds. It's the first time we're doing this here. I'm not really participating in the organization, but we're friends with the person who is organizing it, and there's going to be a lot of people. It's completely sold out, and there's going to be a lot of lineups and queues. No, how do you handle a show like that? I think you went to the British Watchmakers show last year.
That was this year, but it feels like an eternity ago because so much happens. It does depend when you go to an event, and it depends how you're doing it. If you're going as somebody that's enjoying it as a member of the public, that's a different way of looking at things versus maybe me and you that's going there for a reason. We're looking to report, absorb what's going on around it, and take in the ambience so we can then relay that in written or audible form. I'm trying to think what happened at Watchmakers Day. That one was a surprise hit here in the UK, and fingers crossed the thing you're going to will be quite similar. There have been many watch shows in the British Isles over the past few years since the pandemic. Some have been great, some have been absolute dog shit. This one was different because it was run by the Alliance of British Watch and Clockmakers that was created and headed up by Roger Smith, and Mike France from Christopher Ward. Two of the best, nicest, coolest guys in the world. But if you look at them on a scale of horology, they're at the complete opposite ends. You know what I mean? You've got a company that does thousands and thousands per year. You've got a guy that does about 12. And the price point is, monumentally different from one end to the other. And because of that, the fact that that's an entity that doesn't charge for entry, you can be a watchmaker, a designer, whatever, you can be part of that trade alliance and it's free of charge and they offer so many benefits. Or you can be a club member and pay a membership fee as a consumer, an evangelist, a community member, and you get free magazines and things well over the amount it costs to join. And this event was put on by Katja and Alistair, two amazing people that I got on with so well. And it was a massive sellout success. There were queues outside to rival a dance music event or a sporting event. There was queues around the building, and it was insane. But you can't factor in. They were very clever, and they got it right. And I really can't comprehend how they managed to hit the nail on the head first go, because this was their first show, and usually your first show you learn from. They did it all right. There's not much to learn from. They separated it, so you had a morning access pass and an afternoon access pass, because they thought people will come and they'll spend 3 hours or 4 hours, then they'll go away. Then the next batch of people come in. So instead of, again, health and safety reasons, the venue only having a permitted allowance of X amount of people inside at any one time, they knew fine well that there was such a groundswell of enthusiasts wanting to come along and see watches like a Roger Smith watch. When do you get the opportunity to see a Roger Smith watch in real life? When do you get the chance to see a Bel Canto or a Studio Underdog pizza watch? These were all amazing things you could do. And they kept the price point for the public. It's super, it was a bit, I don't even know, maybe £10 or something ridiculously cheap. That is insane. That plus the entry cost for people, plus the minimal charge for the show. I think it was maybe £1,000 there or thereabouts, or slightly more per table for people to come. Some watch events in the UK are charging £9,000 for the smallest of things. It's just a money grab. And these guys didn't do it that way. So it was a massive influx of people. Everybody was happy at the end of it. There was barely any complaints. Maybe a few people couldn't get near a certain brand because it was so popular, but what you meant to do. I would just say turn up, see what it's like. Go in with the expectation that you're going to be hustled and bustled and shoulder checked out the way if it's busy. And there's people wanting to see the Bel Canto. There's people wanting to see a Studio Underdog or things like that. But it's good when places are actually full of enthusiasts, it's busy and it's different. The thing that's happened in the UK since Watchmakers Day is so many other people have created their own version. They've went round the same brand saying, we're doing something, it's going to be just as good, and it never is, because it's a very pale imitation. It's a bad photocopy. Sorry, Xerox for you guys out there. It doesn't work. So when something's new and a lot of time and energy has been put into it, absolutely love it. And next year's British Watchmakers Day, you guys should come across.
No, we'd love to, honestly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. This show here, it's free for entry for anybody to walk through the doors. It's but you do have to register for a ticket, but it was free. Mm-hmm. So anyways, we're really looking forward to it. And luckily enough, at the Red Bar on Wednesday, Mike Pearson was there for Christopher Ward, and Nick was there from Fears, and I don't remember the lady's name from Studio Underdog. So I got to see all those neat little watches in this more intimate setting, so I can skip those tables at this show.
Yeah, and they're good guys. They travel from the UK, not just to the States and the Americas in general. They go across the world to places. I've seen them popping up in Australia and Singapore. Watch collecting seems to be a universal language.
Yeah.
People
Mike Pearson is a great guy.
Love it.
We had him on our second episode.
Mike Pearson is one of the coolest dudes on the planet. And the only problem I have with him is that any time we spend is not enough. We start a show, we've done multiple shows with him back when he was at Zodiac. Not so much now, because we with Christopher Ward we deal with Mike France, the co-founder. Why deal with the monkey when you could deal with the organ grinder? Mike Pearson doesn't really get a look in anymore. He's a super cool guy, and he's so funny, and he gets our humour.
There is a British humour. It's like a Monty Python type thing that is just different. And a lot of people, Barra Plumbo, who is What's on Her Wrist on Instagram, she is a co-host that comes on all the time. She's one of the people, along with Dave Sharp before he got involved with the podcast, that helped me up. They gave me a foot up in the industry and the community. They've always been there to help and give ideas and notions and advice. And she picked up on the humour because she grew up with Python, Life of Brian, Holy Grail, all those kinds of things. And British humour from the 80s. Fawlty Towers, fantastic. Obviously, we wouldn't get away with that today. It used to be amazing. You know, it was unhindered, unencumbered, and it was just everybody had fun at the expense of everybody else. There was no picking on anybody because everybody got it in the neck. And I think that's the reason that she gravitated towards the show and she wanted to get involved, and we obviously welcomed her with open arms because she's from a gemology background plus watches and fashion. She's got so many different facets to herself and what she does. And with Dave, his background, and again, that's maybe why we've got a large contingent of people in Canada and America that maybe grew up. I grew up watching Married with Children. That was the kind of stuff, because you never really care about what's in your locale. So things from the UK, yeah, okay, Fawlty Towers was cool and this was okay. But I loved Married with Children and stuff like that. Home Improvements, that was my kind of childhood.
I watched Mrs. Brown's Boys.
Yeah, that one, not so much. Father. Also.
So some of it is really, and some of it you'll get away with. You'll listen to the Scottish Watches podcast, and occasionally we'll just throw in a reference to some obscure British thing, like Father Ted. If anyone hasn't seen Father Ted, that is my recommendation. Go and watch that. It is hilarious.
Well, I want to thank you for being on with us. Before we let you go, do you have any questions for us, or?
Not really. You guys seem to know what you're doing. Of all the shows that I have guested on, the fact that you pulled quite a lot of stuff from the back catalogue there means that I know that you've not just done a bit of surface research, because there's things there that are buried deep within the collective of listeners that have been there since day one. I'm not saying you've been there since day one, but some of the things you mentioned, it makes me understand that you have actually been on the journey with me, fumbling around trying to find my way with a microphone and an internet connection. So I really enjoyed this one. Went in a few different directions, took it in a few paths. Didn't really talk about the watches so much, more about the community, the industry, and how I try and piece it all together using my own thoughts and feelings, which is different from everybody else. And that is the coolest thing about watches. The last thing I will say, watches don't end today. If you think you've seen all the new releases from today, you've got 300 years to go back the way through. And that's something we talk about in the show a lot. If you think you've seen all the stuff and there's a lull, there's a gap, there's a dip in the market, hey, go back to the 80s. Look at some cool stuff there from Maurice Lacroix. Go back to the 60s. Go back to brands that stopped existing when the quartz crisis happened. There are so many. Look at Amida. Look at different brands, Nevada Grenchen, that have popped out of nowhere, revitalising and bringing back to the fore designs you didn't even know existed because they came out before you were born.
Yeah, and there's so much more out there that we don't even know about. You had mentioned once that you had gone to Italy with Barbara and you found a bunch of brands you didn't even know existed. Last week, I had an article to write for Warner Wound called The Microbrand Digest, and I tried to include at least one Canadian brand in the 5 that I talk about, and I couldn't find one that I hadn't spoken about yet, and the others that I wanted to use were too established. So this is more of a glimpse onto new stuff, and I stumbled on a little brand called Barrington Griffiths, based in Alberta, and I'd never heard of them. I clicked on their website, and the guy there makes his own cases, makes his own designs, imports all of the parts for the movements and builds them there in Alberta. And he charges somewhere around $700 Canadian, $600 Canadian, and there's some pretty neat designs. So I featured him in the Microbrand Digest. They don't even know. They'll find out when it comes out on Warner Wound. But yeah, there's just so much out there to learn and to see and to enjoy and share and that's what it's all about. It's just all about the community, the sharing, the experiences, and the memories.
It never ends, and there are so many untapped gems. There's a guy we bring onto the show when we possibly can get a hold of him called Pietro. He runs a thing called Limited Edition. It's a kind of a retailer. Yeah, he's a fantastic guy, and he will bring things to the fore that I've never heard of. And I get hundreds of emails a day from brands you've heard of, brands you've never heard of. This is such a cool, I was going to say industry, it's a community, an industry, and just a gathering of cool people, cool products, cool brands. And unlike automobiles, where everything's turning a little bit electric and everything looks like a white household good, like a fridge freezer or a microwave. Watches are constantly changing. Geneva Watch Days, they are phenomenal. Anybody that can afford the time or the expense to go next year, go. You don't have to, you sign up, but you don't have to. You can just turn up. It's amazing. But I think we probably need to do a second show at some point because there's so many more things to cover and chat about and bring to the fore.
Rikki, we really appreciate your time. And honestly, you're so kind and generous to us.
Of course.
Couldn't thank you enough.
That's all right. As long as you guys pay the invoice in time, everything's good.
Thanks so much.
No worries. Catch you guys soon. Bye.
Bye.
If you like what you heard today, please hit subscribe and like. It does help the podcast. Until next time, thanks for listening.